Hi, this is Melissa Paget, and I teach at Cathedral Catholic High School in San Diego, California. And this is a presentation that I have created with the help of Kathy Garcia, one of my dear colleagues, on classroom management in the one-to-one classroom. And if you have any questions after the presentation, please feel free to email me at mpaget@cchsdons.com, or I have a Twitter handle at PagetMelissa. So when I was first told a few years ago that our school was transitioning to one-to-one, I have to say that I was very, very pessimistic. This is a picture of a bird's eye view of my desk, and my first thought when I was told we were going one-to-one was, is everything about teaching changing? I got into teaching because I loved the interaction with students and coworkers, and my fear was that all of these devices were now going to change the profession that I loved and worked so hard to succeed in. And I just was very hesitant. I thought that everything was going to change. I thought I was going to be replaced by a machine, and I was very, very concerned. But what I quickly realized is that I needed to change my philosophy because technology is a part of education, and we have got to adjust. Kids as young as 5 and 6 years old are now in schools where they have laptops or iPads in front of them on a daily basis. So it's up to the teachers to adjust, not completely change who we are as teachers, but just to adjust and keep up with the students and make sure that we are doing them a service by adjusting to the changing culture of education. And it doesn't matter if they're 5 or 6 or 17 or 18 years old. Kids are innate with technology, and so as teachers we need to strategize and come up with ways that we can keep them on task and engaged. But I found this quote that I thought was very true, spoken by Mike Hasley, who's a teacher at a high school in Virginia. He said, "Managing a classroom full of students with laptops or iPads is mostly about managing the students." What I've realized over the last 3 years is, despite my concerns that the iPads were going to completely change the profession that I love, I quickly realized that at the end of the day, kids are still kids. Teaching is still teaching. iPads or laptops are a great tool to enhance teaching, but it doesn't change the essence of classroom management or learning. So here are some ideas that I'm going to go over, some ideas to consider as you are beginning the journey of managing a classroom with iPads or laptops. The first thing is lesson plan development. Obviously, a good lesson plan is the key to keeping students engaged, whether there's technology involved or not. And a lot of students who I've talked to over the last couple of years said the classes where they felt the urge to play games or go on Twitter or go on Instagram were classes where they were bored. And so lesson plan development still is the key to successful classroom management. Manage while walking around. MWA, I also got this from Mike Hasley in an article that he wrote. And he was discussing that management by walking around is a key to keeping kids on task, because if there's sort of that looming fear that a teacher is going to appear over their shoulders, then they will be more apt to stay on task and engage at all times. Also, pick your battles. Just as it's not very practical to call out every single kid for any minor infraction, the same can be said for any time you think a kid might be off task. And I quickly learned from teaching seniors that at the end of the day, these are kids who in 6 months are going to be in a college classroom where professors are not going to spend time or energy calling out kids for any single time it looked like someone was off task. And so I decided that I'm going to control what I can control and pick and choose my battles when I want to set examples or make sure a kid is on task. And part of this connects to the next point, which is consistency. Establishing a routine is so important because it reinforces habits that students should adhere to. For example, in my government class, my students knew by the end of the first week of class that during current event presentations, iPads needed to remain away, turned off the desk. And it got to the point where after a couple of class periods, I wouldn't even have to make an announcement. The kids were just used to the idea of, oh, it's current event time, I'm going to put the iPad under my desk. And it's It is always impressive how adaptable kids are once you establish a routine and get them in the habit of certain behaviors. Timers can be another great technique, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more later, but Kathy Garcia, again, one of my coworkers, she really reinforced the idea of always setting deadlines via time where students needed to complete whatever activity you were giving them. So instead of just saying, okay, go ahead and work on your assignment, say, I'm going to be checking your assignments in 10 minutes. And because they had a deadline, students tended to stay on task more often. And again, just clearly setting your expectations. If during morning announcements you do not want kids to have their iPads on their desk, tell them don't have your iPads on the desk. If during class presentations kids can have iPads out, tell them that. Just be very clear, very consistent, and constantly reinforce the behavioral expectations that you are demanding in your classroom. Classroom arrangement is another way that you can affect your students' behavior. And we're going to get into some things about seating charts and seating arrangements and seating charts in a little bit. But I've definitely seen some creative alternatives to the traditional classroom seating arrangement. And lastly, use the iPads. Something that I think is probably a trend in definitely at our school, if not at all schools, is there are some teachers who just are so afraid of using the iPads for whatever reasons that they don't use them. And so this creates what I call the novelty effect, where the students are so not used to using them in a class that when they have the slightest opportunity to use them during downtime, during work time, it's a free-for-all. And I think by routinely and consistently using the iPads, the novelty wears off for the kids and they are more likely to see it as a tool rather than a distraction. And I cannot emphasize enough that I truly think engagement is the key to success in any classroom, with or without iPads. If the kids are bored, they're going to look for distractions, whether it be in the form of writing notes to friends, daydreaming, trying to talk to friends, playing games on the iPad. Engagement is the key. Keep it engaging and the kids will not be distracted. Here's a copy of part of our responsible use policy at Cathedral Catholic High School. And in our responsible use policy, there are some lines that I often highlight when I go over the behavioral expectations in my classroom for my students. I expect them to be responsible, ethical, and use legal manner at all times. And I, particularly with my seniors, like to reinforce that this does not just apply to when you're using your iPad at school, but rather these are good practices to use when you are using social media, your cell phone, your home computer, whatever the case may be. And it's from the wording of this responsible use policy that I have adapted a lot of my behaviors that I expect in the classroom. So what is classroom management? The way that I've seen it, it's a balance between managing your workflow, which then is going to dictate the kids' behavior. If you have an organized and efficient and clear and engaging workflow, the student behavior tends to align very nicely. And workflow has two sides, the distribution and collection sides. Distribution is how the teacher gives information, materials, to the students. And there are probably a limitless number of applications that a teacher can use. At our school, iTunes U is very popular. Many of our teachers have created their own courses within iTunes U, and this helps them to stay organized, and a more organized classroom tends to lead to more successful classroom management. The school website, Edmodo, Weebly, Google Sites, and Forms. I am a huge advocate of Google Sites. I've made classroom websites using Google Sites, and it's on these websites where my students know they can access everything that they need for my class. Moodle, QR codes. So having an organized distribution workflow, again, I think really helps ensure that your student behavior will match your expectations. And on the other side, when you look at the collection of student work, there are a variety of options. I love Google Drive. I use YouTube, Dropbox, Moodle, Weebly, Edmodo, Turnitin.com. And establishing expectations for students using these applications is just as important as establishing the expectations for their behavior in the classroom. And when we talk about the behavior, some things that you might want to keep in mind when establishing your expectations is to remind students that the iPad is just another tool. Just as I'm sure classrooms way back when were completely flipped upside down when textbooks were first introduced, an iPad is just another great tool that is a part of the overall educational experience. It is not the singular part, but rather it is a piece of the puzzle. It's important for teachers to remember that you still have control in the classroom. You still control when kids can use their iPads, where they can use them, and how they can use them. Even though kids might feel empowered by the iPad, at the end of the day, the teacher is still the main authority in the classroom, and you can dictate when, where, and how the iPads will be used. Considering your lecture style might be something to look at because of the iPads. One of my colleagues, he was a religion teacher, he would type up his notes from his lecture and then go back and delete and erase some words or terms. And he essentially created fill-in-the-blank notes so that while he was lecturing, his students would complete them. And he said that he had a lot of success with this strategy because he didn't want to lose the lecture, but he also was afraid that the iPads would be a distraction. So this was kind of a way that he was able to marry lecturing with the iPads. Again, I talked a little bit about timing, making sure assignments that kids work on in class on the iPads are due at a specific time, preferably at the end of class. And if you notice at the end of a lesson that kids were off task, ask yourself, what can I do differently? What can I control? What can I manipulate so that maybe students will stay on task more? And give yourself a break. Kids are distracted all the time, whether or not they have technology. And so if you find that it seems like kids are really disengaged, look at what you can do differently and don't be afraid to try new things. Know that this is an ongoing process. Here I am after 2 years of one-to-one, and there are still things that I change on a daily basis. So it's an ongoing process. There's never an end point to the recipe of creating successful classroom management. And where do we start? So it's day one in your class. How do you integrate the iPads without completely altering the landscape of your classroom management? Something simple to start with is seating arrangement. If you are like my classroom, then you might have your desk in kind of a traditional setup where they all face the front of the room, and then the teacher's desk faces the student desk. One thing to consider is don't be afraid to mix it up, because if the students face you, then your view to their iPads will be blocked. So some of my colleagues have actually experimented with different seating arrangements where the teacher can see the backs of the students and therefore view what is on their iPads. Some students also have told me that their teachers lecture from the back of the classroom so that they can monitor what's on the student's screen. And just a before and after picture, if you have students around the peripheral of the room and your view of their iPad is blocked, it might be more difficult to catch them off task than if you can see their iPad like in this picture. Other body language cues that I have gotten used to over the last couple of years is what I call game playing posture. And this is easier to demonstrate than to explain, but there's a certain look that students have when both hands are gripping the side of the iPad and they're intently staring at their screen, that you know, okay, no one reads a textbook that hard, or no one is completing their Google site like that intensely. You know that they're playing games. Also, something that correlates to this is when students are playing games, I've noticed that they have limited blinking, and this probably sounds ridiculous. I have no medical proof to back this up, but it just anecdotally, I've noticed that my students, when they're in the midst of a FIFA soccer game, they don't blink as much. And so those cues are something that I look out for to see, okay, who's off task. Also, there's more games coming out where students can compete against one another on their iPads. And oftentimes I might not notice one kid's off task, but then if I can see one kid with his game playing posture looking over at his other friend or making comments like, oh, like I stopped your goal, I know, okay, those two are both off task. Now I need to address it. Most of the girls in my classes, I would be less likely to find them playing games, but Pinterest definitely is a popular website. And something nice about Twitter or Pinterest or other social networking sites is if you look for students who are doing the constant swipe, Typically that means that they're looking through their news feed or their timeline, and most often that is not going to be for a website that is assigned for a class project. So the constant swiping up is another key. And then also a new thing that I noticed this past school year is students now are using their iPads as a disguise for their cell phones. So they will prop their iPads up and use it, what I call, as a tent to their cell phone. So now, even if it looks like, oh, their iPad's up, they must be reading. Again, walking around while managing is important managing while walking around is important because you might catch something that you couldn't even see from one stationary place. Other common problems, the iPad tilt. There are 3 different levels that you can see these students keep their iPads, and I would say that the girl in the middle looks like she probably is less engaged than her friend right here who looks like he's typing, or even this flatter screen, which would be easier for the teacher to see. Also, body posture, getting comfy. It'd be very, very difficult to be typing or to be working on an assignment in this body language. So just, again, it takes practice, and I would say just over time, you will be able to recognize, okay, it definitely doesn't look like these kids are working on their assigned task. Also, a lot of teachers who I work with have said that they require their students keep their iPads flat. I have kind of thought about this, gone back and forth on it, and something that I'm most comfortable with is if a student has a built-in keyboard with their cover or their case, I allow them to keep their screen up so that they can use the keyboard. But if they do not have a built-in keyboard, then I actually do also prefer to keep the iPads flat. It's just easier to see and monitor what's on their screens. When the iPads are flat, it's also easier to see if the students are where you have directed them to be. So for example, if students are completing the same Google form, it's easy to see, okay, obviously the interfaces all look the same, they're all working on the same project, so they are on task. And seating chart depends on the assignment. If you're doing group work, it might make sense to have students make groupings of their desk, which might make it easier to circulate for you. So it just really depends on the assignment. If they're doing independent work, this seating arrangement probably would not be conducive with or without the iPad. So it just trial and error, try different seating assignments, try different arrangements and see what works best in your classroom. Sometimes teachers might have tables compared to desks, and again, you just need to play around with it and find out which seating arrangement works best for you. Recognize what on-task behavior looks like rather than off-task behavior. Clearly, these 2 girls are looking at something that is probably not part of your classroom assignment. I would hope students would get this excited about an assignment, but my guess is they probably are looking at something on another website. And then this is probably one of the better examples of game playing posture. And again, look for the lack of blinking. Keep circulating. All of the teachers who have given advice and feedback about classroom management in the one-to-one classroom constantly say, keep circulating. Again, when students know that a teacher might walk around or near them, they are more likely to be on task out of the fear of getting in trouble. A technique that one of my colleagues shared with me that I thought was fantastic is the now infamous double tap. So students are very adept at quickly closing out of whatever app or game they're not supposed to be in. So if a teacher is walking around, he might close out of FIFA and open up the reading assignment that he's on or whatever. Well, one of my teachers said that he might say, okay, double tap. And some people might not know that when you double tap your home button, all the apps that are still running appear. And so even if you walk up to a student and he or she is working on his Google site, if you double tap, you can see all the apps and the most recent ones. So for example, this screen shows that the most recent app open on this iPad was 4 Picks 1 Word, which is a game. And then before that, Pocket Law Firm. And then before that, Bingo. So even if a kid thinks that he got rid of the evidence, there are ways to still catch it. And I would also say, don't be afraid to go techless. It's about balance. My students would say that they use their iPad a lot. I'm probably one of the most iPad using teachers, if you will. However, there are times where we go techless. This is a picture of a project that my students were working on in economics, and we use iPads probably 70% of my class time, but there is the time where, sorry guys, iPads are going away, and that's okay. They're engaged whether they have the iPads or not, and that really is the key. Balance, balance, balance. And if you still have problems, sometimes students are your best resource for getting ideas or tips about, hey, how can I keep you guys on task? And here are actually some tips that students shared with my friend Kathy Garcia. They said some of the most effective strategies their teachers used included standing at the back of the room, notes with fill-ins, interesting topics. If the topic is interesting, they're more likely to want to pay attention. Interactive lessons. If you involve the students, they're less likely to want to go off and do something else. Student choices. So giving students choices for what application or tool they want to use to create an assignment or make a project. If you are having students make a collage, let them choose how they're going to present it or create it. What might not distract you might be distracting to others. Seating chart. So a lot of students talk about that, especially in a traditional seating arrangement where all the desks are facing the front of the room, if they are sitting in the back, oftentimes it's distracting for them if someone in front of them is playing a game. If the teacher is not monitoring the iPad use, then even if student A isn't playing games, if the kid in front of her is, it still is a distraction for the first student. And then let them fail, aka responsibility. A lot of my seniors said, hey, if a student wants to spend his time playing games in class, he's going to essentially be quote unquote punished on tests and quizzes, and his grade is going to reflect the fact that he didn't pay attention. And one of my most, I guess one of the teachers who I admire most in the country, literally, is Dave Burgess, a former teacher from West Hills High School. And he said, it doesn't matter how well you know your content if your students aren't listening. And so he is really one of the foremost innovators when it comes to engaging lesson plans and how to hook your students. And he's exactly right. If you don't engage the students personally, interactively, then it doesn't matter what your lesson plan is. It doesn't matter what tools they have in front of them. Engagement really is the key. To conclude, I just wanted to share with you some of the words from some of my most respected and trusted coworkers. I particularly admire these teachers' ability to integrate the iPads in their classroom while still maintaining successful classroom management. I asked them to finish the sentence. The key ingredient to successful classroom management in a one-to-one classroom is, and the first response, to remember that good teaching is still good teaching. Although I encourage teachers to take risks, stick with what has always worked for you as a teacher. And that was a thought from Kathy Garcia, who is an American Sign Language at our school and has taught all grade levels 9 through 12. Another quote, movement. A teacher should be moving around the room at all time. Not only does constant movement help me keep tabs on what my students are doing, but also allows me to speak and interact with more students, not just the ones with their hands up. And those are words from Christy Ballew, our English 1A 9th grade teacher. She also teaches creative writing. And again, these two women have been tremendously successful in incorporating iPads into their classroom while still having great classroom management. I asked them to share any additional key strategies or tips, and what they shared was, you need to circulate around the classroom, give them deadlines like, I'll check on you in 15 minutes. Be careful about how long some tech elements will take. Practice first and then introduce it to your students. This allows you to understand how you want to use the tech element in your class, but it also gives you a sample work for your students to view. And lastly, just some miscellaneous thoughts. If you are struggling, try to stay positive. Look for others on your campus that are doing great and ask them for help. Work together and collaborate. It will save your sanity. And try to incorporate tech elements into your lessons that allow the students to go beyond what they could do with just paper and pencil. This way, they don't resent the tech. If they believe a paper-pencil assignment would be faster and better, they won't see the purpose of using tech to get the same job done, especially if it takes longer. And I think their words really speak volumes for how these women have implemented technology in their classroom and just done such a tremendous job. So just the last few more things to leave you with. In the end, find a workable solution for you. I hope that one of the many different ideas that I threw your way sticks or maybe inspires you in your own classroom. Remember, it's okay to pull back. I know it might seem daunting that you are supposed to use the iPad every second of every classroom period. Remember, it's okay, and it's all about balance. And check in and see how it's going without punishment. Again, it's not very practical to regulate on every single infraction that a student might commit, but check in and see if you guys can go through this process together without having to incorporate too much discipline so that the students don't view the iPad as a means to get in trouble. And lastly, engage, engage, engage. We're only as strong as our lesson plan and the level of engagement, and the classroom behavior will only follow as good as our lesson plan is. So if you have any questions, please feel free to, again, email me, mpadgett@cchsdons.com, and thank you so much for viewing the presentation. I hope that you were able to get an idea or two from what I had to share. Thanks again.